What's going on, everyone? Today we are discussing Michelangelo Antonioni's film from 1966, Blow Up. Whose idea was it to watch this movie?
Mine?
Okay,
Why do you say it like that?
just curious. Um, what
I
do you think?
think it as cringe as it is to say, I think it literally came from when we first started preparing for the first episode of this podcast. I was reading the New Hollywood Wikipedia page, and this film was credited as one of the biggest European influences
That
on
makes sense.
American New Hollywood cinema.
Hi, welcome to this edition of the Cinema Retro Magazine podcast. Tonight, we're talking about Blow Up. It was directed by Michelangelo Antonioni. And at that time, European cinema was going through a real renaissance, the so-called New Wave movement with very bold and unusual films. And he was among the forefront of the directors that were bringing those movies to the screen. He was Italian by birth. But this was going to be his first English language film. An interesting point about the film is that MGM financed it but got cold feet. They were afraid that the controversy around the film with the nudity and this new era of sexual permissiveness on screen would not be suitable for the studio that brought people to Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. So they did something extraordinary. They set up a phony company called Premier Productions. And that was the company that released Blow Up, technically, but it was really just a cover for MGM. The plan sort of went awry because the film became a big critical and box office hit. And MGM really didn't get credit for that, except for people in the industry who knew it was them. So they didn't really get to bask in the glory of this great hit. The Blow Up was also very instrumental in getting rid of the dreaded American production code, which had been infantilizing movies since the 1930s. Thus, many good movies had to be compromised in terms of their adult content. But by 1966, MGM was willing to go without the production code through this phony company they set up. They didn't want MGM to defy the production team, but the phony company could. It also happened to be the same year that Jack Warner defied the production code people by refusing to make any cuts in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Between the two films, it showed the end of the production color. Within 2 years, a rating system was put in place where people could judge for themselves what movies they wanted to see. The last few frames of Blow Up are among the most debated and controversial of any film. I hope that intrigues you enough to see Blow Up. It's a really good movie, and I hope you enjoy it. Meanwhile, visit us at cinemaretro.com to learn more about Cinema Retro Magazine, which is dedicated to cinema of the 60s and 70s, and to get your latest dose of movie news. Thanks for joining us.
In general, like you could say the movie is about a photographer in like the mod London British scene. One day he's like shooting in a park and he's shooting kind of secretly this couple. And when he gets spotted by the woman, she's like, stop, delete that, or not delete. It's it's on film. Get rid of that and give it to me, blah blah blah. And he says no, and he goes home later at some point and finds out that there's a figure in the back of the couple and he's holding a gun and stalking them. And as the film progresses on, he finds also a dead body in some of the photography. And he goes to the park to find the dead body and he sees it. And he's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And then he comes back home and all of the photos that he had developed are gone of the crime scene, essentially. And yeah, and that's kind of it, actually. That's kind of it. And he goes back to check on to see the body again, and it's not there. And kind of all these other ambiguous, weird little side plots and side characters are woven into the story, and some come back in and out of his life. But you're mainly following him the whole time, and this weird phenomena that's happening.
I was reluctant to do that to explain the plot, and I think you did it really well because the plot begins halfway through the movie. Like you're almost an
Yeah,
hour in the movie, and then things start to happen. He inadvertently photographs what looks to be a murder, and so
like a lot of the movies that we talk I think we have and are going to talk about. It's very vibey. It's like a lot of scenes that aren't driven so much by plot, but more by characters interacting. Um, this one I think was really good at that, actually.
My take is that it's a very good concept, but I didn't necessarily love the kind of emotional sensibility of the film. I didn't necessarily love the characters, and I thought it was a very high concept, kind of maybe mid execution is what I would
Wow.
say.
Coming from the Cassavetes guy, he doesn't like the strange characters and
No, no,
and
I
a
have
high
nothing wrong with them being
concept
strange.
film.
Nothing wrong with them being strange. I
Uh-huh.
just think they just weren't they didn't have any emotion to them. They were kind of inanimate objects that we were supposed to project certain ideas onto based off of our associations of the era about the swinging 60s and the mod culture, subculture and everything. Have you guys ever seen Blowout?
Yeah.
So I think Blowout is basically this movie but 10 times better. And so it's hard to having seen Blowout to watch this because because this is kind of like Blowout without all the elements that I liked about Blowout. So this movie didn't really lean that heavily into the Hitchcock element, which I thought like obvious direction to take it in. If I were given this material to direct, I would say, "Oh, this is a voyeuristic psychological thriller in the vein of Hitchcock, where someone inadvertently unravels a murder after the fact and then has to separate their a love or attachment from their pursuit of truth." But Antonioni doesn't really take it in that direction. He's much too cool and abstract for that, and he really leaves it kind of like with an existentialist vibe, whereas De Palma, what I liked about his take on this concept is he made it explicitly political, he made it much more emotional and tragic, and he kind of leaned more into the Hitchcock elements.
Yeah, I also
Ye-
I know the conversation with
There you go.
Gene Hackman is also
Yeah.
inspired by this film, and I had just seen that the other day, and I thought it was going to be more of a political, yeah, overt political message about the man or like, people are always watching you kind of thing just from reading the plot online. But it's really not about that. I really don't think. I feel like
Yeah.
Jake, you mentioned it, like the plot in air quotes doesn't even come in until half of the film. It's more an aesthetic slice of life with this scary, intriguing thing happening to this guy.
Yeah, no, I think that the that's a good point in bringing up the conversation and also Blowout. I immediately thought of the conversation too because
Yeah,
I had seen this before, but it's been a couple of years now, and I think the conversation does it way better. But because it has that intrigue, it has that mystery, like it's almost like procedural in a sense, but it has um those moments that are um a little bit like the end of this one where there's not it's kind of left up into interpretation a little bit, but I think that
definitely.
that was Blow Up's problem was that halfway through you start this procedural and that's the best part of the movie where he's blowing up the images, uncovering this mystery, and then it sort of fizzles out from there. However, I do think that I really like its it seems like a relic of its time, but in a good way, I think, because it was such a specific time, and I think the emptiness that you feel from the characters are sort of
Yeah,
a reflection of like just like the empty, drugged up hippie culture, and we're in that period, 1966, where like yes, it's London, swinging London, mod London, but so much of that was similar to what was happening in America at the time. You had JFK shot in 1963, and I think that that moment not only changed it made everyone disoriented in America, but I think also abroad as well. JFK was such an international figure. And then you have those years where things start heating up, and then in 68 and 69 it just explodes. You have RFK murdered, MLK murdered, you have the Manson murders.
you have
And
the
I think that
Vietnam protests at Columbia also. 68 was like the year I
right.
feel like where everything blew up.
So looking at it from that standpoint, I like the sense of disorientation. It seems like it's almost ahead of its time in a way, but it's also a period of its time because it's those ideas are there, but it's smack in the middle of it. So viewing it almost as like like a documentary of a sorts is how I was seeing it, and I think that's why I liked it maybe a little bit more. But I definitely agree that the most interesting parts were those um, more procedural mystery. Like that is fascinating. It's almost like two different movies in one. You know?
I watching it, I was thinking a lot about this like main guy who we follow, who's in similar vein of Five Easy Pieces. He's kind of an asshole. And yeah, he's just like a womanizer asshole, really curt and explosive, similar to like a lot of the traits that Jack Nicholson's character had. But also I think the filmmaking of this film is like specifically eerie. Like even the shots in the park, there's like nobody else around. The grass is like very well manicured. I'm thinking about the rock and roll scene in which like the crowd is literally watching this like rock scene completely deadpan, like 100 teenagers in a room just standing still watching this rock band, and it's just weird. You can't watch it and not feel like that's weird, and I think that was a specific filmmaking choice that is probably a critique of this soulless, lifeless, confused, eerie environment. And maybe the filmmaking, watching it, it's not really enjoyable or doesn't hook you as much, but I think that was a choice that was made that's meant to like reflect a critique.
It's interesting because I watched a few other Antonioni movies before this, and La Ventura has a really similar moment where I don't know if you like if you not I guess it's old, so this is not really a spoiler, but this relationship is happening. They go to this island, and this woman disappears, and Monica Vitti plays her best friend, and the best friend and the husband sort of have this incredible relationship that is almost it feels so wrong, and they're also dealing with the disappearance of this woman, and I feel like he deals with the mystery of the woman disappearing. It's similar in Blow Up because he never reveals what happens, right?
Yeah.
Like at the end of Blow Up, we still don't know what happens. And I think that he dealt with that mystery and the impact on the characters in such a stronger way than it was in Blow Up. And I don't know if it was like the fact that Antonioni, this is like his first English language movie, and that felt like a little stunted. But I also like you have to at least like watching the characters, like watching David Hemming's character. I mean, he was excellent in the movie, but his character was like frustrating to watch. And I think that it was a little different. It wasn't like this like intrigue. Oh, I really want to get into his mind. It's like I sort of feel like you see what you see is what you get, even though he's sort of cryptic and
Yeah.
whatever. Meanwhile, you're watching La Ventura, and Monica Vitti is like this. There's so much there to explore. You could watch it for 5 hours.
You did have a breadth of like wacky people walking in and out of scenes and shots. You had like the gay couple with the poodle in front of the antique shop. Jane Birkin is in it, along with other just like interesting cameo people who all like have very strong personalities that they present on screen. But I agree. I think it's a fair shortcoming of the film, probably of the script. We don't feel very much for our main guy.
Yeah, I think it's well, there's multiple ways you can appraise this. You can say it's overly intellectualized or overly abstracted, or you could say it's intentionally minimalist and is trying to, be more focused, like you said, Isabel, on mood and vibe in a Cassavetesian sense. But I still feel so much more connected to Cassavetes' characters in any of his films. I mean, they're like real people. They're like, they have flaws, they're dirty, they swear, they're lying, their hearts are broken. I don't know. I guess the characters in this film are also complex people, but this was something from Kale that I liked. Antonioni wants us to feel the emptiness of modern life, but maybe it's just the emptiness of his characters.
Classic.
Yeah, she basically says that the film is too emotionally sterile and intellectually self-conscious. And then she writes, they simply exploit the ready-made, this characters, they simply
Yeah.
exploit the ready-made symbolic meanings people attach to certain details. And so I kind of felt that way while watching the film. I agree that the conversation and Blowout are both much more, in my opinion, developed versions of this because they both kind of grab onto a particular feeling that the society felt at the time, which I guess you could say this is what Antonioni is doing, but in those films, it's much more consciously political, because
Mhm.
it's after Watergate, after JFK was killed. In Blowout, it's kind of like a remix of the JFK murder. You know, a politician is killed and somebody happens to capture it in a Zapruder picture type sense, but instead of film, it's on sound. And then Travolta is tasked with putting the pieces together. And I love that concept. Like, that is such a cool concept. And there's so many good movies that have done that. Like, having a protagonist who has to use the medium that you're watching to piece together to fix something. Like, that's such a meta, working on multiple levels, fascinating art imitates life thing. But I really just felt that the conversation with Coppola and that De Palma's Blowout had that. Plus, they had a stronger psychological thriller mechanism that kind of kept you locked into, like Jake said, this procedural of the character has to go to point A to point B, put it together. I guess it really has to do with, do you want this concept to be a classic American noir film that has these tragic elements, or do you want it to be this European art house film that's open ended and that doesn't tell you one way or the other? And I guess
Yeah.
I prefer the noir method.
Yeah, no, watching this, I was like, God, it's so European. It totally reminds me of European filmmakers. Even when I was doing the festival circuit for contemporary film festivals, there are just some European filmmakers that are just so European. And it's funny seeing a lot of European filmmakers that become successful and they get American funding for their films and like ostensibly have the films made for an American audience. It's kind of like a level of achievement, I think, for a lot of European filmmakers. And you'll see a lot of times their films become more explicit in the characters thinking, what's happening, problems. The characters have to verbalize a lot more and things have to be spelled out to a lot to American audiences. But I also, yeah, I think Kale is right in that there's a lot of assumptions that the director is making here, assuming that the audience will feel some type of way, will feel desire towards these models, will feel relatable to an artist who's struggling. Like he's assuming these things as the way to have us be interested in what's happening versus spelling it out and building up the world within the film itself. I agree. Which might be like an American thing versus the
Ha-
European thing.
Have you guys seen McCabe and Mrs. Miller, the Robert
Mm-mm.
Altman Western? Because
Mm-mm.
it reminds me of that, because that's just another thing that Altman very much is more in the Antonioni European camp than the story-driven American
Yeah.
directors. He kind of just drops you in this Western town in Vancouver and kind of just lets the camera linger through this town. You're going into a tavern, you're watching people eat dinner, you're watching prostitutes in the brothel going about their lives. You're not like following these plot directives like, oh, this character kills this guy and this character goes from point A to point B. So it's totally, there's a Tarantino interview about this. It might have been on Charlie Rose, where he talks about the difference between plot versus story, and how,
Mm.
American films are all about plot and kind of following this structure, this narrative structure that the writer has written out beforehand to try to get you through the hero's journey and through this
Yeah.
3 act structure, so that by the end you feel some sense of satisfaction and completion. Versus in the European mode, they're just like, let's just vibe out with these people for a bit. And I like both. Like, I don't want to say that I could never like the European model. That's why I bring up the example of McCabe and Mrs. Miller, because that's an example of when I think it was done perfectly. Like, I love that. That's probably one of my favorite Westerns, and it's so European, so not American in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I did like about the movie though is the focus on a photographer as the subject, and I think the commentary on images displaying reality or maybe not doing so. Like, I was thinking back to Sontag's on photography, and she talks extensively about the relationship between images and reality and how it warps our perception of reality and how it's really not an accurate representation of reality. Uh, and I think that aspect of the movie felt very modern in this era where nobody can agree on what the truth is, and we are
Mhm.
inundated with images, and yet our sense of reality seems to get more and more detached. So that aspect of it I really liked. And Isabel, you and I were chatting a little bit about the other day, The Eyes of Laura Mars. Like I love photography and photographers,
Yeah.
as a vocation presented in movies and commentary around it. So that aspect of the movie I really liked. I'm curious what you guys think about that.
Well, it totally relates to the ending, which is all about the ending for viewers is that this gaggle of teenagers dressed as mimes who you see at the beginning of the film riding around town and having a ball. It ends with them pulling up to a tennis court and miming a game of tennis while the photographer is watching. And then one of the kids hits the fake ball over the fence, and our photographer main character goes and picks it up and mimes picking it up and throws it
Yeah.
back into the court. And then as you're watching just him as the last shot of the film, I'm pretty sure you start hearing like the real sounds of a ball hitting a racket and hitting the floor of the court. Am I wrong? Or did you
Sounded
guys
like
hear
it.
that as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that.
Which is a very strange ending because that there's no resolution with the like murder that we've been following or we think is like the main, driving plot device. But I think that's totally related to the Sontag essay about like photography and reality and deceptions of that. I was also thinking that it was interesting that it was teenagers. We end this film with teenagers kind of playing make believe, and I was wondering if there was kind of a critique in that. Also thinking about that the film opened with them, um, in contrast to the photographer. He was leaving his previous working gig, which was I think at a factory or like at a hotel for like working class people. Do you remember this? The opening scene? It's like
He's at a flop house.
juxtaposed. Yeah, at a
He's at a
flop
flop
house. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was important to keep that in context with how I viewed the teenagers, was in contrast to like this older working class British society to this like younger, ostensibly like the representation of Maud, like with a young generation kind of thing. Maybe playing make believe to a certain extent or something like that.
Yeah, Andrew Sarris, the film critic, I read his review of the movie, and he talked about that too. He said, I would almost think that Antonioni was a Marxist if I didn't know any better for that opening, where he contrasts the people coming out of the flop house with these kinds of like unburdened youth painting their faces running the streets. So he
Yeah.
agreed with you on that. You and Sarris, same page. But yeah,
Wait, I'm gonna say something on that because you brought up the Kale thing, and I think that's great. I was wondering, I was like, I wonder if Miles went and read the Kale review of that. But she had a line in there where she said that Antonioni is more interested in pretty pictures than what they mean.
Mm,
And in a sense, I feel like I sort of disagree. I think the opposite is true. I think he's trying to say too much in this movie. Maybe like the pressure was on because it was it was actually like American financed by MGM
yeah.
after he had the La Ventura, La Nut, whatever. And so maybe it was like, I have so much I want to say, I'm going to say it all in this movie. But it felt like, okay, you're doing this introduction of like juxtaposing the working class people coming out at whatever. You're talking about reality, you're talking about disorientation, you're talking about hippies and Maud London. Like, what point are you trying to make? Was my thing. It's like it's not that he doesn't care what the pictures mean or whatever. It's more that he's trying to say so much that it ends up becoming convoluted, and he doesn't take a stance. And I sort of hate that.
No, I was thinking about that. A lot of the aesthetic choices, the mise en scène was like minimalist type of stuff, like very flat, straight lines. Also thinking about like the guy's studio that he's living in and making photography in. It's open warehouse, open concept kind of thing. And this is also the same time that the minimalist movement is really taking heat, or becoming popular in the States and in Europe. And they, I think, are like the perfect example of like trying to say so much. Like they wrote a lot of the most popular and prolific like minimalist artists wrote essays about like theory, like really convoluted theory and things that they were trying to say, but then they would just like put a single line of like neon light against the wall or just like a cube on the floor, you know? And I think even if they were well intentioned, that kind of misses or alienates a big part of like audiences because you are kind of cutting off an emotional reaction that a lot of art like predicates itself on. Also, something we talked about last week, it's the audiences were becoming more educated and younger. And this is a funny thing about young audiences specifically at this time, but also today, it's they oscillate between being like this overeducated, pretentious people, as well as like having a cool kid detachment that's like inarticulate.
This is Antonioni putting on his Marshall McLuhan hat or his John Baudrillard hat. This is like very much a media theorist's film about the breakdown of reality and media and how you can manipulate reality with the manipulation of these technical aspects. It's like Baudrillard's essay, "The Gulf War did not take place." Like the Gulf War did take place, but he's arguing like it didn't unfold the way that we receive it through the news and through these bites and through all these things. And in the same sense, did the murder take place of the man? If there's no footage because someone broke into the mod photographer's apartment and stole his studio and stole his blow ups, did the murder actually take place? Or if there's no record of it, is there essentially no reality? So I definitely think this movie is about the struggle for the newer generation with their increased exposure to constant media, radio, television, film, to struggle with what is reality and what's not.
No, that's well said. Listening to you guys talk about the movie and like talking through it, I almost wonder if this movie is like more interesting to talk about or write about than actually
To
watch,
watch,
which is
yeah.
funny. Yeah, it's like I was listening to Tarantino's he has the Video Archives podcast, and he was talking about it was The Big Sleep, which is the Robert Beecham one where they took the Marlowe character and put him in London, and the movie's pretty bad, but they ended up having a really fascinating conversation about it, and he was like, I feel like this movie is more interesting to talk about than to actually watch. And that's sort of how I feel about Blow Up. And I'm curious what you guys think, because I feel like this movie is sort of like a rite of passage, like, you know, for a lot of people, and like a lot of normies that I talk to really enjoy Blow Up or have seen it. Like I'm curious what you guys think, like the interest is for young people in maybe like letterboxed crowd. I don't know. Like, what's the interest there? Like, I have a friend from high school who has like a blow up poster on their wall, and I'm like, have you actually seen the movie? Like, what do you think about it? Like, what's the interest there?
I
I mean,
yeah,
it's certainly interesting,
I
but
feel like it has been TikTokified, and that like people are really just looking at a very superficial level of it, and like, oh, it's models. Like models are hot and popular and like fun to watch on screen, and the poster is really edgy and cool. Yeah, I think I mean, the two, it's funny, like the two cultures that I like with the visual art background thinking about watching the movie was like the minimalism, which I just talked about, but also the pop art, which is like all about celebrity and like popularity and 15 seconds of fame kind of thing, which I think resonates with a lot of people today post social media kind of thing.
Have you guys seen that clip of Anthony Fantano on the Adam Friedland show? And he's like, I hate to burst your bubble, bro, but like that album that was so important to you, this band did it like way before that. But that's like kind of how I feel about like Blow Up. Like,
yeah,
because you're like, why are people obsessed with Blow Up? Like, I feel like Blow Up, if you have never considered how a story might do what we just said, which is, play with reality or talk about the kind of breakdown of I mean, what would you even say is like the isolation of the individual or the
Hmm.
alienation of the individual? I mean, that's what all of Antonioni's movies are about, more or less. That's where the term Antonioni-esque comes from. It's like that feeling of ennui or dissatisfaction with modern society. But if you haven't seen a movie do that, and then you watch this, you're like, holy shit, like movies can do so much. And so for some people, if that's the gateway into realizing that, then that's great. But if you've already kind of seen movies do that, and maybe they've even done it in a better, more expressive way with better characters, then it's like, what do you really get out of Blow Up?
maybe that is a good sequence though. Watch Blow Up, then the conversation, then Blow Out. Like, watch them in order, and like they
Yeah.
sort of build on each other and their themes. I think Blow Up is like, we have had some negative things to say about it, but I do think there are aspects of it that really it it feels very much like a product of his time, like I said, but it also has those elements like the commentary on truth and reality that are, you know, they're still important. I just think that Antonioni's thing of like, you know, the European people walking around stylishly and like talking about big ideas sort of doesn't translate to like mod London, I guess, and maybe that's where parts of it felt, I hate to say boring because I don't really get bored, but like it, it felt like there was nothing was truly happening with the character, at least until that moment where he realizes, that he may have captured something inadvertently.
No, I
Um,
think you're totally onto something with that, Jake. Like I think that's actually a big point.
it doesn't translate. And also, I was watching a documentary about Blow Up, and he had a translator on the set that was. It was funny because the picture of the translator almost looked like he was directing Antonioni, in the photograph, and it's like, when you're discussing such interest. I mean, there are interesting themes and interesting questions being asked, but maybe like the language barrier or the fact that he was like they almost did the movie in London. Like he was searching for a place to do it. Or, sorry, in New York, and they ended up settling on London because it was
Well,
the center of that scene. And it's like maybe that's part of the problem. I don't know. I feel like we're gonna get a lot of hate on this because I feel like everybody is like,
I know.
I mean, it's a good movie. Like I rated it well. I like the movie. His next movie, Zabriskie Point, which is like, I feel like that Zabriskie Point is one of those movies that like would be really cool in a museum, like on a white wall, and you're just sort of watching it as like an art piece rather than like a legit movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of totally felt that, but I didn't know why I felt that until you said that, because I think that Antonioni's style definitely works better in Europe, in these kind of ruins, or these giant European vistas, or like take for example like Red Desert, which I really like that movie. It's shot in this like industrial hellscape with like smokestacks and factories and people in big wide shots, like Monica Vitti by herself in like a big gray brown field, and it's all about like their expressions. It's all about the people's expressions in their face, and then these very gaunt, sort of angsty industrial locations. And for whatever reason, that just is much more powerful to me. In maybe it's the exoticism, maybe it's because I'm not European, so when I see that, it's like it could be this other world. Or in La Ventura, when they go on the island in the middle of this ocean and it has this kind of alien quality, I think maybe that could be it. It's almost like a De Chirico painting. It's like you feel these wide open spaces that kind of make you feel a little bit off and a little bit alienated, even though there's nothing inherently wrong or sinister happening. You get this kind of sinister feeling from the geometry of the composition. I don't know if it has something to do with that, but that aspect of it I felt was very much missing from here. And I agree. All the other Antonioni films I've seen, I preferred to this one, and I felt more of the Antoni ennui, is what they say, is like that kind of quality that all his movies have, where you just feel a bit schizoided out.
Um, so, like, I made us watch this movie because I had read about it as like a very strong influence for American cinema, at the time. And I guess my question to you guys is like, what do you see as like similar things that American directors picked up from this film?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I feel like you have those direct influences, right? You've got like The Conversation and
Yeah.
Blowout. Um,
I mean, that whole idea that the world of the film exists beyond the purview of the characters is so central to all New Hollywood films, but especially Robert Altman's films. I haven't seen him in an interview specifically mention Antonioni as an influence, but I'm sure he was influenced. Um, kind of all of the That's kind of the idea of neorealism, or one of the ideas of neorealism, which is before this period. Neorealism is right after World War II, but the idea of those movies and how they were edited, De Sica, Rossellini, all those guys, was that the world of the movie is not just you're following the character, but like the character could leave the frame and the world continues on without them. Like, there's often a lot of shots in neorealist films of like an empty cafe with like maybe a couple side characters drinking, or like a train station or something where the main character is not involved at all. And so I think that that's something that this film has, that a lot of new Hollywood American directors took, but I don't know if they consciously took it from this film or if it was just kind of part of the soup of the era.
Okay, as you said that, Miles, it got me thinking. Like, a part of the movie, maybe its influence is that it asks questions, it presents these big ideas. Hollywood was such a machine that, you know, you have these young filmmakers who start to ask questions, and it's not meant to be like a specific ending. I mean, movies in the studio system were like, you kind of had to have this like final ending. It's like the love story that turns out perfectly or something. There couldn't be any sense of there being anything off with it. But also, it's like an anti-epic in the sense that it's like it takes place in one day, yes, but you know, it doesn't like exactly what you were saying. Like, there's these things that exist outside of the movie. It's like an epic wants to give you the full picture and show you everything that's going on over sometimes decades. It kind of maybe it's I don't know if it did, but I feel like that I hate slice of life movies. Like, I feel like this was better than like the slice of life. Like, the worst one that I can remember that's most recent is like the Steve Jobs biopic. It's like
Oh,
Aaron Sorkinified. I can't stand that stuff. I don't know why. It feels confining. It feels like claustrophobic.
yeah.
And this, I hope, maybe that's part of what this also started.
Have you guys
What?
seen Clue?
Which one?
Clue? Oh yeah.
Clue. Yeah, I feel like that's another example. Like Conversation, Blowout, Clute, Body Double. Like these are all, like those are Pakula, De Palma, and American
Yeah.
directors. Yeah, I feel like they're doing this, but like riffing on a way better, more kind of psychologically charged, more emotional, more like thrilling take on it. So I may probably they're inspired by this, but I think they improved on it.
To be fair to Antonioni and the movie, like, it was 1966, and a lot of these ideas were not necessarily in their infancy, but it was like it felt like a product of that time rather than, some of these later movies. Like The Conversation having a commentary on surveillance is like that could have only happened in the mid 70s, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a Watergate, post Watergate phenomenon. Well,
Yeah.
this is more just like this is not about like one administration or one political zeitgeist. This is just like the human condition now feel alienated about it. Like it's
Mhm.
much more abstract.
I think though it's very specific to media, like specifically photography and like cult of celebrity and the way that media like shapes all of that in our perception of reality. And that
Yeah.
is specific to the 60s.
But that's what's frustrating. It's like, are you making a commentary on media and photography? Are you making commentary on society or on hippie culture? Or is this just
It's too
about this guy
much.
and his journey? Like, like, my interest is like, okay, so there's this kind of jackass dude who's taking photos. He's clearly like not getting he's not he's not getting like the vitality that he wants. He wants something new, something different, and then he fucks around and finds out and ends up photographing this murder. And it's like, oh, you're actually getting something real now. Like, that's what was interesting. Meanwhile, Antonioni is interested in these lofty questions. I would like, as someone who's interested in photography and media, like, I want to know, how do his photos, maybe it's too boring for a movie, but I'm like, how do his photos change? Like, he was walking around those models. You've got all these models who are just standing there like robots. He's walking around them, trying to get them to smile, but there's nothing happening. And then after something like this shocks his world, how does that change his photos? Like, he's this young kind of douchebag who has nothing to say, nothing to offer really in his work. How does that change who he is as an artist? Like,
I think
I don't
there's
know. That's
one
that's an
point
interesting question.
I agree. That is an interesting question. There's one point where he does allude to that, and obviously it's like
Hmm.
not effective enough because it's not resonating with the audience being you two. But like where his friend, the painter, you like visit him at the beginning and you see his paintings and they're kind of like impressionist, kind of like Jackson Pollock, abstract
Yeah.
impressionist type of paintings. And you meet his girlfriend, the painter's girlfriend, and later on the painter's girlfriend comes to visit the photographer and sees the single blown up photo of the body left on like the in the studio space, and she says it looks like the paintings, um which was interesting. And also at the beginning when you first watch the photographer going over to his friend the painter's house, he's like, please can I buy one, please let me buy this, like it's so cool, why won't you let me buy it? And the painter's like, no, 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 it's not for sale.
Mm.
So I thought that was interesting.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I didn't know what to make of that, but that was such a fascinating moment. I'm glad you
Yeah.
mentioned
Forgot.
that.
Yeah, I forgot that she said that. What do you guys think about the Jane Birkin character?
I don't know. There's a lot of weird characters that come in and out, and I'm like, what's the point? I think you're right, Jake. Like, he's trying to say too much. I'm sure he would be talking about like young working class British girls like prostituting themselves for fame, and it's so cheap and whatever. Or maybe it's a
Hmm.
critique of like women who or young women who get like chewed up by this system and like chewed up by these evil guys or whatever. Um, but like it's not, you don't spend enough time with either of the young girls that show up on in the studio to really like care for them or to feel to understand what's happening to them, really.
Hmm.
What do you guys think of the costumes? And like the set design?
I like that. I like that a lot.
Drip, right? Drip. His
Yeah.
like his like green
So
velvet blazer, that
drippy.
was sick. I was like, I want that.
Yeah.
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 The
I'm such a
outfits.
sucker also for like the open floor loft space. I'm like, oh, whoa, cool. Think about all the paintings you could have in there, all those big paintings.
I was thinking like would be a cool place for a party. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know what
Hmm.
that says about our contrasting artistic viewpoints, but I was like, this would be a cool place to like host like a really cool event. But
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean the whole swinging 60s scene that he captures is really cool, but I just wish there were more interesting characters that were part of that scene.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like Altman does that so well, specifically with Nashville. Um, And I wonder how much of it is because we're American and we like can instantly recognize these tropes and these people and we like feel for them and we kind of just jump in there. Or, is it because Nashville is really great at creating like an environment that feels lived in and there's like music playing all the time and it's like warm in a certain way where you just like emotionally are more involved in everybody's life versus maybe the failure. It's like what we're saying. It's like the film is better to talk about because it's like an interesting critique, but you maybe sometimes you don't want to watch a critique or you can't watch only a critique because that's
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
not emotionally engaging enough.
Yeah, or satisfying. Yeah, I kind of felt unsatisfied by the ending, which that's all right. I don't think every film has to, like have this cathartic emotional release, but I just felt a little bit like, one scene I was thinking of the photographer when he goes to the antique shop, he really wants the landscape painting and he's like obsessed with the landscape painting. And this is like totally me reading too into it, but I feel like Antonioni is a director of landscapes. Like I think if you watch a lot of his movies, he gets his points across through these really wide landscape shots of like a city, like some ruins in Rome, or like a field with like factories in it. And I feel like he's not so into people and the intricacies of their lives and their relationships. He's kind of like the opposite of Woody Allen. Like I always think of Woody Allen as like an anthropologist filmmaker. Like he's so interested
Hmm.
in like the kind of sinuous connections between people and their desires and all and their insecurities. And Antonioni might be interested in that, but he doesn't get it through that. He gets it through the landscapes, and the landscapes are like stand-ins for peoples. And I feel like the landscapes were kind of in the background, so to speak, in this film, and not in the foreground like his others.
Mm.
It's funny because from Lanat and La Ventura, like I got something different, especially in Lanat, like his focus on the characters and their relationships and how they're reacting to each other and longing for like connection or some semblance of a relationship that means something, like they're grappling with this idea of divorce. Like he handled that really well, but he also balanced it perfectly with mood and the blocking of the characters and the lighting and just the vibe of the movie. And I feel like he almost bought into that idea of him being the kind of mood director so much to where he sort of lost sight of the importance of those characters and their interpersonal relationships, because it didn't seem like the same direct. It felt like a late era version of Antonioni, and then you look and
Totally.
see it, and it's like, oh, this happened only a few years apart after Lanat. How is that even possible? Like, it's not that it's bad, it's just very different than his other than his other movies. The other thing is that I wasn't as dissatisfied with the end of the movie. Like, think back to The Swimmer. Like, I'm okay with the sort of open-ended, the open-ended thing where you kind of have to make sense of it yourself. And I think in a sense, like, um, I was okay with not knowing the outcome of the murder, like if like who did the murder or how did it happen, whatever. But I felt like I wanted a little bit more from his character.
So, Isabel, what would you say about how Killing of a Chinese Bookie handled that? Because I feel like in the beginning you were saying that Cassavetes is guilty of the very same thing, the relying solely on mood and vibes and not characters.
Yeah, I didn't. Oh, you're saying why didn't I like The Killing of a Chinese Bookie and why do I like this one?
I guess, yeah, that's a better formulated version of my question.
Because I guess with Cassavetes, it felt there was almost the little flicker of hope in Killing of a Chinese Bookie, seen through probably the Cosmo character. It's almost so painful to see that go down the drain. I found it like really a painful watch, probably because of that.
Interesting.
Versus this film, it's so detached, everything is very cold, everything is very minimal. It doesn't hurt so much when things don't go right and when um nothing good ever happens. You
He
know?
never really lets you in David Hemmings's head. He always kind of keeps you at a distance
Yeah.
in a way. Like with Cosmo, you're like you're with the bar. You're sorry, you're with him in the bar.
You're like
He's like,
literally in his blood in certain
yeah, exactly.
shots, you
And like the
know?
close-ups, you're like you're with him the whole time. He's on the floor. He's drunk. Like, and that's why I love the movie because he gets you so emotionally intertwined with these people. But this is like the opposite of that. Like you're always kept at a distance from the photographer.
Yeah.
Cosmo wears his heart on his sleeve. You know exactly who he is, and he doesn't mess around in that sense. Meanwhile, you have David Hemmings' character, who's like, I keep thinking back to that scene with him and Vanessa Redgrave, where he's sort of telling her these lies and then taking back. No, 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 actually not. And then telling her another lie and then taking it
Yeah.
back again. It's like that's as far as you get with his character,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Yeah.
maybe he's just unserious, or maybe he's like. I mean, there's interpretations you could take with that, but it's also like
You just get
I
nothing.
want
At the end of that, you have nothing. He talked and
yeah.
you've gotten nowhere except that like he's a closed off person.
Because he's like, that's my wife. Actually, I don't. It's not my wife, but we have
Yeah.
kids together. Actually, we don't have
We don't.
kids. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
taking them out. Or maybe that's like Antonioni. Whoa, this is. I just got like galaxy brain take here. What if, what if that's like Antonioni being like, actually, this guy doesn't have any of these things because it's a movie, and I'm just making this character up as I go along. So it actually doesn't matter if he has a wife or if he has kids or anything. I'm only gonna let you know what I want you to know, just like how David Hemmings only knows what's in the photographs. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's blew my own
The
mind.
media is the fucking message.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like
Um,
there's no reality. Reality is constructed with the medium, right? Like that's the idea. Like that's the point of that scene, maybe. Because he's like, who cares if he has a wife? Because he's not real. He's not a real person.
Else
Hey,
is like 5 star. Actually, this is the best movie I've ever seen.
hey, I gotta
I
rewrite
think
my.
I figured it out.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree with that, but I think also like that makes it not a good movie. Like I think, like or that makes it I shouldn't say it doesn't make it a good movie. That makes it an unsympathetic watch. You
Yeah.
feel nothing because that's like the magic of
Mhm.
movies is that you get to step into another world and you step into other characters and there is make believe and there is a fantasy. Like that is the cinema that like pulls people. Um so
Make
I
me.
think it's really funny that the film did so well. It won the Palme d'Or. It made $20 million in the US box office.
That's
I
crazy.
know. It like did really well. And it's kind of funny because watching it, and also seeing like young people our generation's response to it, I think a lot of it is a very superficial reading of the film and that it's like it's salacious, there's sex on camera essentially, models, like cool fashion, all this stuff. It's like, wow, you didn't get the critique. Like
Well, what is the critique?
the critique is that it should leave you feeling like empty and bad and weird. And instead people were like, this is like sick. This is like cool and sick, you know?
That's funny. It's like the
um,
opposite. That's there was like a, sorry to be so like annoyingly online, but there was a film Twitter discourse about this like a couple months ago, like the difference of what the director intends versus how the audience takes it, especially with like cult films. Like the examples
Mhm.
everyone was using was Paul Verhoeven, because his films are supposed to be anti-capitalist, they're supposed to be anti-fascist, but when people watch like Battleship Troopers, they're not like, oh my God, fascism is so bad. A lot of people I talk to watch it, they're like, how sick would it be to like shoot a bug? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, or like,
Yeah.
they're like RoboCop. Like, how sick is it when the Robo guy like blows the guy's head off? But the point is like, police are corrupt. But people watch it and they're like, yo, the guy's head exploded. That's sick. So it's
yeah.
like, so it's like you can't always control how people receive your message, and also what's more important, how 100 million viewers received it, or how one auteur, in his studio thought it would be received. I would say once you release something to the world, it kind of takes on a different meaning based off of how people receive it.
I don't know. I think about like, sorry to keep talking about the visual art background, but I feel like this movie was so entwined with like the minimalism, the pop art people that it's like impossible not to. But also the abstract expressionist guy, character painter of the film, his paintings physically looked a lot like Jackson Pollock. And I was thinking about, I think Jackson Pollock is an interesting person because his work blew up because it was the representative, it's like representative of like good American individualism. And you have a bunch of art critics talking about that and like, blowing up how the public should perceive his work. And I think that,
You're talking about like Clement Greenberg and Harold
yeah,
Rosenberg and all those
yeah, and how
guys.
he
Yeah.
is like a bullfighter in the arena, you know, and it just, the art became so much bigger than I think his psyche could handle. And maybe it wasn't completely reflective of the guy who it actually was, who struggled so much with his interpersonal relationships. Um, he wasn't like this beacon of independent strength. It was actually like, quite the opposite. Um, and so I always think that means he's a bad artist because he like couldn't actually articulate on the canvas something that was happening inside of him, or was he chewed up by a system that no one can face, no one can fight against, um, which is public hunger or something like that, or the media circus or something like that, you know?
Mm.
Yeah. So for my birthday, like a month ago, me and a bunch of friends went to Jackson Pollock's house, which is just up the road from here, and I was thinking about the same exact thing, because the like attendant there was giving us the whole lecture, and then I've thought about this before with respect to abstract expressionism, and Tom Wolfe's book The Painted Word, which I really like, argues a version of this. But I was like, why can these critics, like you said, I think it was the 110th school critics, is that what they were called, or something like that?
Yeah, 10th Street.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
10th Street people, yeah, and that whole, they kind of, why are they able to, like, project their meaning onto this art, when most people don't receive it that way? They were obsessed with the theory
Oh,
of flatness and all that, and that ties into what Jake was saying about, is this a movie that's more interesting to analyze than to watch? Because that's kind of the central argument in Wolf's book, The Painted Word, that abstract expressionist art puts the cart before the horse. It puts theory in front of the tactile aesthetic experience of art. And once
Mhm.
once you have to read an essay to enjoy a abstract expressionist painting, or in this case, once you have to read an essay and read a critic's review to enjoy a European art house film, well, what the fuck is the point of the film or the painting? I thought the medium is supposed to be this immediately aesthetic experience, and now I gotta like theorize before I even watch it. It's like,
yeah,
so
it's so interesting. I totally agree with that. And the minimalist carried out like the logical next step of like the flatness of the canvas and intellectualizing the art and stuff like that. Um, and I was thinking about how today, I think it's fair to say that there's like a general spiritual crisis in young people. And people are like a lot more eager and open to like talk about spiritualism, whether that's like a traditional Catholic something or it's like women with astrology or something like that. And you kind of had a version of that in the 70s as well, and like the rise of like the age of Aquarius and all these vibey things. And Anna Mendieta, who was like a big performance artist who was like, making all about the earth goddess kind of thing. And so you have these cultural moments of like probably like high levels of education and analysis and wealth, followed by more primal, emotional, spiritual kind of reactions against that.
I think part of the problem with a movie like this, where the director doesn't take, it's not that he doesn't take a side as if there's a side to take, but he doesn't take concrete positions on some of the issues that he's bringing to the forefront, which is totally fine, but it leaves us feeling like he's throwing everything at the canvas to see what sticks. And also you run the risk of having every successive generation view the film differently and then project their own societal or personal perspective onto the film, right? That's, you run the risk of that. Now, parts of it felt really modern, and it made a lot of sense. But it's also like when you're vague in the kind of thing that you're trying to portray or tell, you leave it so much up into to interpretation, to where the film is in more in a sense than what you were saying, Miles, that the film, once you put it out, it's for others to interpret, and it's not yours anymore. It's like that on steroids, because everybody has a different perspective. It's similar to like watching a John Hughes movie when you're no longer in high school. It hits different. It's almost, it seems, it doesn't hit the way it did when you were young and you were thinking that way. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
I hear
Yeah.
you. I would argue though that for me it was like like a great piece of art to me has that tension, like has that, like it can be a
Mm.
critique or it can be a celebration, like it's disgust and it's attraction. And I think that this film actually is like too much critique. I totally agree, and I think we're both on the same page that like he's trying to say way too much, like critiquing the youth culture, critiquing pop culture, critiquing, I don't know, whatever you want to talk about. The media is the message, these kinds of things. But to me, it's too much critique. And kind of going back to what we're talking about with the Cassavetes film, it's maybe that was more of a powerful film because it had a bit of hope, and then matched by the disgust or something like that. Versus this film is just coldness and detachment all the way through, and so you never like it's not intriguing in that way, you know?
Isabel, secret super fan of Killing of a Chinese Monkey.
I
Let's
still I
go.
I I said it. I think I edited it out of the final version of the podcast, but I said it was a really painful watch, and usually after I first like on a film that really hurts me on the first watch, I'm like, ugh, like why do they make these types of movies? Like it's so bad for the psyche. And then after like a couple of days after I recovered, I'm like, you know what? It's actually really amazing that film can make me feel so much. So
Well, you felt the same way about The Swimmer too, because when you initially logged on Letterboxd, you gave it like a 2.5 or something, and I was like, "Why didn't you like it?" And you're like, "Because it's so sad." And I'm like, "That's what's great about it."
no, I gave it a 2.5 because of the ending, but now I'm more open to liking it, to giving it 3 stars.
Oh, I love The Swimmer, man. The Swimmer's so good. I'm gonna be
Yeah.
thinking about that movie for years.
Wait, okay, we're kind of getting to the time. So does anybody have any last things that they want to say about Blow Up?
While I wasn't the biggest fan of the movie, I'm very glad that it did so well in the 60s. And I'm very impressed that, Isabel, you told us just now, I didn't know this, how financially successful it was, and it also won the Palme d'Or. So that's great because that kind of opened the door for other directors to do that kind of thing. If you release this movie now, holy shit, you would get like run out of town. You'd be called pretentious. You couldn't get it exhibited anywhere. No one would distribute it.
Mhm.
Like you could not do this movie now.
Yeah, nobody would
Like
distribute this movie. I
it's
agree.
cliche to say, but like you can't make this movie anymore, but you actually can't. And that's sad that you can't. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of this movie, I think you should be able to do this movie, and it should be economically viable to try to do so.
Agree with everything you said. My marker for a good movie is if I'm still thinking about it the next day. And with Blow Up, I was certainly thinking about the next day. And yeah, I did say it's sometimes in some ways more fun to talk about than it is to watch. But it's certainly a movie worth watching for that reason alone. It's something that will stick with you and that poses a lot of questions. And especially if you like media or photography, watch this and read on photography. And there's a lot to explore there for
Yeah.
sure.
I think that I'm glad you ended with that. I feel like that is really the crux of the film.
Thank you for tuning in,
Okay.
everybody.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.
My friend Miles has asked me to provide my own personal interpretation of what the ending means. Well, to me, it means we know there is no ball. Okay, these are mimes, and they've been pretending that they're playing tennis, but they're doing it so effectively that after a while, Hemmings begins to hear the sound of a ball, just an anticipation feeling. I think Antonioni was trying to tell us that the power of suggestion can make us believe anything, even if it's not reality. Therefore, how much, if any, of what Hemmings thinks was a murder was actually true? Did he let his mind go a little crazy in anticipation of what he thought he saw? Was there really a murder? There's a lot of coincidences that take place, if that's the case, in the story leading up to this finale. If I were to sum it up in a sentence, I think Antonioni's telling us is that the power of suggestion, when it's very strong and convincing, can make us believe what we want to see and hear, not what we actually are seeing and hearing. So, hope I didn't ruin it for you, but see what you think. Take care. Stay tuned.